Good morning, everybody. Good to have you with us on a Monday morning, and I hope you're feeling joyful. That was the topic of our sermon on Sunday, was tough joy from Philippians 4, 1 through 9. But you know, as you look through this little letter of Philippians, we discover that really is the theme throughout this book. And we find several verses scattered throughout that deal with this topic of joy. You know, I just want to mention a couple of those this morning because in Philippians 1:4, Paul says, I always pray with joy, for you. In the second chapter, at the beginning of the second chapter, he says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, and then we jump down here a little ways, and he says, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. But Paul's request is make my joy complete. In the third chapter, well, guess what we find? Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. It is no trouble for me to write the same things to you again, and it is a safeguard for you. Well, guess what? The pattern continues. We go to the beginning of the fourth chapter, and in the fourth verse, there Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. So I'll tell you what, I'm betting that the theme of Philippians has something to do with joy. And you know, when we think of joy, it's interesting that Paul focused this letter on that theme, because when you go back in the history of the founding of this church, which probably occurred around 51 AD, this letter's probably written about 10, 11 years later. But when you look at the founding of that church, one of the things we find is the account of a Philippian jailer who was standing outside of a jail, and inside he heard the prisoners singing. And the song leaders were Paul and Silas. And so in a sense, this was a church founded on a foundation of joy. And so I think that's why Paul sort of picks out this theme for his letter. Now, when God gives joy, he gives it direct from him to us. And for that reason, since joy comes from God, it means that joy is tough. It's a tough joy. You know, in 1 Thessalonians 5:16, one of the things Paul says there is be joyful always. Now, that seemed like a tall order, but it says that joy is tough enough as a Christian that we can draw upon the joy that God gives, and we can rejoice always, no matter the situation. It means that you can rejoice if your rejoicing is in the Lord. If it's not in the Lord, your rejoicing is going to be kind of like an intermittent stream that starts and stops and changes with whatever circumstances come about. But if God is the joy, then we need to draw upon that joy, and we need to protect that and maintain that joy in our lives. So one of the questions is, how can we maintain that joy? If we're to be joy maintainers, there's some things you can do to build and maintain and protect that. Sometimes sitting down and listening to some good music and just enjoy. Let your ears be filled with sounds of joy. You can also have your ears filled with that motorcycle that just drove by, okay? But good music is a joy maintainer. Exercise and recreation can be joy maintainers. And if we don't take care of our physical being, we can get exhausted and down. A third joy maintainer is proper rest. Get a good night's rest, and if you need a nap, take one. Take a nap for Jesus, okay? But that's a joy maintainer. And then the fourth thing that I want to say is protect your relationships. Because if you're protecting your relationships, you're being careful with joy. You're maintaining it. And if you have any relationships that are kind of out of order, out of kilter, go set them right, because it'll help you to maintain joy in your life. But along with that, there are also some joy drainers. And here's some joy drainers to avoid. Avoid complaining, because complaining drains our joy, and guess what? It drains the joy of others. Criticism is a joy drainer that does the same. A critical spirit tends to go deep in the bones, and we develop a miserable attitude that can never see the joy in anything. And our criticism and our complaining can become habitual. The third thing that drains joy is gossiping. Gossip gets our attention on people and off the Lord. And so it serves to drain our joy instead of filling us with joy. It divides people rather than bringing them together. So avoid gossip. If that's something in your life, that's going to drain joy from you. Last of all, avoid anger. The Bible repeatedly tells us to be careful with this whole thing of anger. In fact, the scriptures tell us that the devil can get a foothold through that anger. And so to maintain or to keep from draining joy, be careful with this aspect of anger. That means don't stay angry, forgive quickly, and forgive fully. And you see, those are some things to do and to think about and to avoid that will become a blessing in your life. And you will be a joy maintainer rather than a joy drainer. Have a good day. God bless. Bye-bye.